The scent of antiseptic clung to her like a second skin, a sterile shroud over the panic churning in her stomach. Alara's heels clicked a frantic rhythm on the polished linoleum, each step a hammer blow against the silent, terrifying question that had been screaming in her mind for 6 hours. The call had been brutally clinical. A car accident, a head injury. Mr. Blackwood was stable, but... That single word had ripped her world from its carefully constructed axis. She pushed through the door to his private room, her breath catching in her throat. There he was, Damien Blackwood, her husband, the man whose name she wore, whose ring sat cold and heavy on her finger, whose life was contractually bound to hers for 1 more year. He was sitting up, a stark white bandage wrapped around his head, a stark contrast to his dark, disheveled hair. His formidable presence, the one that commanded boardrooms and made competitors tremble, was diminished, replaced by a raw, unsettling vulnerability. But it was his eyes that stole the air from her lungs. The familiar, piercing gray eyes, usually so full of cold calculation and guarded distance, were now wide with a frightening emptiness. They swept over her, from her anxious face down to her white-knuckled grip on her purse, and held no flicker of recognition. None. A doctor in a crisp white coat stood beside the bed, a tablet in his hand. He looked at her with a practiced, sympathetic expression. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Dr. Evans. We were just talking." Alara's gaze darted from the doctor back to Damien. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Is he... Physically, he's going to be fine. Some bruising, a concussion," the doctor said, his tone gentle but firm. "But the impact caused significant trauma. We're seeing signs of retrograde amnesia." Amnesia. The word was a gunshot in the quiet room. Alara felt her knees weaken, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. This wasn't part of the contract. Memory loss wasn't a clause in their meticulously drafted agreement. Damien's voice, raspy and uncertain, cut through her spiraling thoughts. You said she's my wife?" He looked at Alara, his head tilted slightly, like a man trying to solve a puzzle that was missing all its pieces. The lie was on the tip of her tongue, heavy and poisonous. The truth was a catastrophic explosion waiting to happen. "Tell him the truth," a small, sane voice whispered. "Tell him you're Alara Vance, the woman he hired to be his wife for 2 years to secure a merger, the woman who shares his house but not his bed, the woman he barely speaks to outside of public appearances." But looking at him now, stripped of his power, his arrogance, his memory, he was just a man, a lost man looking to her for an anchor in a sea of nothingness. And the lie, the one she had been living for a year, felt suddenly, dangerously real. "Yes," she heard herself say, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm Alara, your wife." The words hung in the air, a vow spoken not before a priest, but before a gaping chasm of his forgotten life. Damien's eyes searched hers, desperate for a truth he couldn't feel. He saw the unshed tears glistening in her eyes, the genuine terror on her face, and mistook it for a wife's love and fear. I'm sorry," he whispered, the apology raw with a confusion that twisted a knife in her gut. "I don't remember you." "It's okay," she breathed, stepping closer to the bed, her every instinct screaming at her to run. Instead, she reached out, her hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently touching his. His skin was warm, real, not the cold, contractual handshake they usually shared. At her touch, something shifted in his gaze. The emptiness was still there, but now there was a flicker of trust. He was latching on to her, his lifeline. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked, the phrase, a weapon of truth and a shield of deception all at once. He shook his head slowly, a grimace of pain flashing across his features. "I don't remember anything. My name? The doctor told me my name is Damien Blackwood. It is, she confirmed softly. The doctor, sensing the shift from a medical consultation to something deeply personal, cleared his throat. We'll be running more tests. For now, rest is the most important thing. And familiarity. Being around loved ones can help stimulate memory recall. He gave Alara a knowing look, a look that said, "The rest is up to you, Mrs. Blackwood." Then, with a final nod, he left them alone. Alone. The word had never felt so loaded. She was alone with a man who was both her husband and a complete stranger. A man whose entire reality now rested in her hands. She could shape it. She could create a history for them, a love story that never existed. She could erase the cold, hard lines of their contract and paint over them with soft, warm colors of a life she secretly, foolishly, sometimes dreamed of. The contract. It was her prison and her protection. It stipulated no emotional attachment, a clean break after 24 months, a generous settlement that would save her family from ruin. An attachment now, especially one built on a lie this monumental, would destroy everything. Damien's thumb brushed against the back of her hand, a simple, unconscious gesture that sent a shockwave through her. He was looking at her with an unnerving intensity, his mind a blank canvas waiting for her to paint the first stroke. "Tell me," he said, his voice a low, desperate plea that broke through her panic. "Tell me about us." He held her hand tighter, a captive seeking solace from his captor. And in that moment, Alara knew she was lost. The contract was ink on paper, but this man, this vulnerable, broken man looking at her as if she were the only thing holding his world together, was flesh and blood. And she was about to build their life on a foundation of beautiful, devastating lies. She had to, for his sake, for hers. The real reason they were married was a secret he could never, ever remember. It would destroy him. This, she reasoned with a heart that was beating far too fast, was a different kind of protection. A vow she would make in the silence of this sterile room. "I'll protect you, even if it costs me everything." Her mind raced, grabbing at fragments of the public persona they had so carefully curated. The charity balls, the smiling photos in magazines, the rehearsed answers to reporters, it was all a script. But now, she was the sole author, and the lead actor had forgotten all his lines. She started, her voice catching. She cleared her throat and met his searching gaze, forcing a gentle, reassuring smile that felt like a mask cracking on her face. "We met at a gallery opening. You were captivated by a painting, and I told you the artist's story. You said you were more captivated by me." It was a lie. He'd barely looked at her. His lawyer had arranged the whole thing. But Damien didn't know that. He listened, his eyes fixated on her face, absorbing every word as if it were gospel. A faint smile touched his lips, the first she had ever seen that wasn't for a camera. "I did?" "You did," she confirmed, the lie tasting sweeter, easier this time. "You were relentless, charming. You said you knew from the moment you saw me." The beeping of the heart monitor was a steady rhythm in the room, a counterpoint to the chaotic symphony in her chest. She was creating a memory, a shared past that was a complete fabrication. With every word, the chains of their contract seemed to dissolve, replaced by silken threads of a story he would believe, a story she might one day desperately wish was true. She was no longer just a contract wife. She was the keeper of his past, the architect of his present, and the gatekeeper to his future. And that power was as intoxicating as it was terrifying. He needed her, and a dark, hidden part of her soul, a part that had felt invisible for so long, reveled in it. The drive home was a masterclass in suffocating silence. Damien stared out the window of the black town car, his expression a mixture of awe and bewilderment as they passed through the towering wrought iron gates of his estate. The sprawling mansion, a monument of cold glass and severe modern architecture, was a testament to the man he had been, powerful, wealthy, and utterly solitary. It was not the home of a loving couple. It was a fortress. Ilara's hands were slick with sweat where she clenched them in her lap. She had called ahead, instructing the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, to be discreet. But how could she explain the sudden need to merge two completely separate lives, lives that had been meticulously kept apart within these very walls? The master wing was his. Her own suite was on the opposite side of the house. It was the first, most glaring piece of evidence of their sham marriage. As they stepped into the cavernous marble foyer, the echo of their footsteps was the only sound. Damien's gaze swept the space, the soaring ceilings, the minimalist art, the chilling lack of personal touches. "This is our home?" he asked, his voice laced with an uneasy disbelief. "It feels empty." "It's very modern," Ilara said quickly, her voice a little too bright. We travel a lot. We haven't had much time to add clutter." Her heart hammered. Lie after lie. They were stacking up, each one a brick in the wall she was building around him, around them. Before he could question her further, a sleek silver sports car crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway outside. A man emerged, his tailored suit a shade too flashy, his smile a razor's edge. Marcus Blackwood, Damien's younger, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous brother. Ilara's blood ran cold. Of all the people who could derail her fragile narrative, Marcus was at the top of the list. He knew the terms of the contract. He had been a witness. Marcus strode into the foyer, his eyes flicking from Damien's bandaged head to Ilara's tense posture. Well, he said, his voice dripping with insincere concern. "Heard you tried to redecorate the front of your Bentley with a telephone pole. And look at you, Ilara, playing the devoted wife. You're more convincing than I thought." Damien frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" He remembered his brother, at least. A small mercy, or perhaps a new kind of curse. "Came to see the damage for myself," Marcus said, his gaze fixed on Ilara. "And to make sure everything is in order." The last words were a clear threat, meant only for her. "He needs to rest, Marcus," Ilara said, stepping slightly in front of Damien, a protective gesture that was both an act and a sudden, fierce instinct. "The doctor said, I'm sure he did," Marcus cut in smoothly. "But business doesn't rest, does it? Especially not when the final paperwork for the merger is due. You remember the merger, don't you, brother? The whole reason you shackled yourself to—" He let his eyes drift over Ilara with deliberate disdain. A sharp pain shot through Damien's temple as he tried to grasp the word. Merger? This was it, the precipice. Ilara's mind raced, searching for a plausible story, a thread to weave this ugly truth into her beautiful lie. "He's talking about our families," she said, her voice miraculously steady. She placed a gentle hand on Damien's arm, willing him to look at her, to believe her. "Blackwood Industries and Vance Holdings. Our parents were corporate rivals for years. They were furious when we fell in love." She looked at Marcus, her eyes daring him to contradict her. "They said the only way they'd approve of our marriage was if it came with a business merger. A way to turn our unconventional union into a strategic alliance. It was their cold, cruel test. They thought we'd never go through with it." The fiction was brilliant in its audacity. It took the cold, hard fact of their business arrangement and reframed it as a romantic obstacle they had overcome. A modern-day Romeo and Juliet, their love forged in the fire of corporate warfare. Damien's eyes, which had been clouded with confusion, slowly cleared. He looked from his smirking brother to Ilara's earnest, pleading face. He saw the fire in her eyes, the defiant tilt of her chin, and he believed. Of course he believed. It was a story worthy of the life he was apparently living. "They tried to stop us?" he asked Alara, his voice soft with a newfound wonder. "They tried," she confirmed, her heart aching with the weight of the deception. "But you told me you'd fight anyone, even our own families, to be with me. You said a contract of theirs couldn't break a vow of ours." Marcus let out a short, incredulous laugh, but he said nothing. He could see that Alara had won this round. To expose her now would be to tell his injured brother that his entire marriage was a lie, that the loving wife by his side was a paid actress. Even for Marcus, the cruelty of that was a step too far. For now. "I'll be back, Damien," Marcus said, his smile tight. "Once your head is clearer, we have things to discuss." He shot one last venomous glare at Ilara. "Take good care of him. After all, you're being paid handsomely for it." The parting shot was a poisoned dart. He was gone before Damien could process the venom in his tone. The silence that descended was heavier than before. Damien swayed slightly, the confrontation having taken its toll. Alara's hand was still on his arm, and he leaned into her touch, his strength failing him. He doesn't like you," Damien stated, his voice barely a whisper. "He thinks I'm not good enough for you," Alara said, another half-truth that felt more real than the whole lie. "He's wrong," Damien murmured, his eyes closing. He seemed to shrink before her, the powerful CEO vanishing, leaving only a tired, injured man. "You're the only thing that feels real." He leaned heavily against her, and her arm went around his waist to support him. His head rested against her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. The contract had stipulated a 5-foot distance at all times in private. Now, he was closer than he had ever been, and he was holding on to her as if he were drowning. "I'm tired," he breathed. Can we go to our room?" "Our room." The two words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had 1, maybe 2 hours before he was fully settled, before he started to question why her clothes weren't in the closet, why her scent wasn't on the pillows. "Of course," she said, her own voice sounding distant to her ears. She began to guide him toward the grand staircase, toward the master wing, toward the heart of their shared deception. "Lean on me. I'll get you there." As she supported his weight, her captive, her husband, her secret, she felt a terrifying, consuming thought. What if she could make this lie true? What if she could make this empty house a home? What if the man leaning on her, the man who had no memory of their cold bargain, was a man she could actually love? The thought was dangerous, a spark in a room full of dynamite. And as they took the first step up the stairs, she knew, with dreadful certainty, that she was already holding the match. The master suite was a reflection of the man she thought she knew, vast, immaculate, and achingly lonely. A king-sized bed with a severe charcoal gray headboard dominated the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a meticulously manicured garden, but inside there was no life, no stray book, no casually discarded piece of clothing, no photograph in a silver frame. It was the sterile sanctuary of a man who kept the world at arm's length. I should unpack some things for you," Alara said, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. She helped Damien to the edge of the bed, her hands quickly retreating once he was seated. "And bring some of my things in. I've been using the guest suite to give you space while I get ready in the mornings. You know how you like your solitude." Another lie, woven seamlessly into the tapestry of their new reality. He simply nodded, his brow furrowed as he tried to grasp the memory, to feel the truth in her words. "I do? You're a man of routine," she said, forcing a light, teasing smile. "You like your silence before you face the world. I always found it endearing." She turned and fled before he could respond, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She practically ran to her own wing, a part of the house Damien had likely never even seen. Her rooms were her own, filled with books, sketches, a warmth that was entirely absent from the rest of the mansion. She grabbed an armful of clothes, a few books, her toiletries, anything that could make her presence in his room look plausible. She was a thief in her own home, stealing pieces of her life to construct a shared one. Back in the master suite, she found him standing by the window, his back to her. He was holding a small, polished silver box. Her breath hitched. She knew what was inside. "I found this on the nightstand," he said, turning around. His expression was unreadable. "What is it?" She slowly approached, her eyes fixed on the box. You don't remember?" He shook his head, the frustration evident in the tightening of his jaw. "Nothing." With trembling fingers, she took the box from him. Her touch lingered on his for a moment longer than necessary. "This was from our first anniversary," she whispered, lifting the lid. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a single, perfectly preserved white orchid, the same flower she had carried in her bridal bouquet. "You gave it to me. You said that even when the real flowers faded, you wanted me to have this. A promise. To last. Forever." A memory, sharp and unwelcome, sliced through her. The real anniversary. They had spent it on opposite sides of the country. He had been closing a deal in Hong Kong. She had been at her family's home, dealing with another creditor. The box had arrived by courier, delivered by his assistant. There was no note, no call, just a cold, perfect, contractual acknowledgement of the date. A symbol of their business arrangement, nothing more. But Damien didn't see that. He saw the story she was painting for him. He looked from the delicate silver flower to her face, his gaze softening with a tenderness that made her ache. "I said that?" he murmured, reaching out to trace the line of her jaw with his thumb. His touch was electric, a brand against her skin. "I was romantic." "You have your moments," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. Was it for the lie she was telling, or for the beautiful, impossible truth she wished it could be? "I'm sorry, Alara," he whispered, his eyes searching hers, filled with a raw sincerity she had never seen in him. "I'm sorry I can't remember being that man for you. I'm sorry I can't remember loving you." "Don't!" she choked out, unable to bear the weight of his guilt, a guilt he didn't deserve. "It's not your fault. We'll get it back. I promise." "I can't lose you again," she thought, the words a frantic prayer, even though she knew she had never truly had him in the first place. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. His scent, a clean, sharp mix of sandalwood and something uniquely him, enveloped her. It was intoxicatingly close. The 5-foot rule had been shattered, and with it, the last of her defenses. He was no longer Damien Blackwood, the cold, calculating billionaire who owned her for another year. He was just Damien, a man who thought she was his world, a man who was becoming hers. Suddenly, his phone, which she had placed on the nightstand, buzzed. The screen lit up with a name, Isabelle. Alara froze. Isabelle Delacroix, the fiery, ambitious CEO of the European firm Damien's merger depended on. And, according to the relentless gossip columns, Damien's on-again, off-again lover for the better part of a decade. The woman he was with just before their contract began. A woman who certainly wasn't aware of the intimate, loving marriage Alara was currently fabricating. The phone buzzed again, insistent. A text message preview flashed on the screen. "Isabelle, I heard about the accident. Are you all right? I'm flying in tomorrow. We need to talk. Dee, please answer me." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Alara. This was a complication she couldn't spin into a love story. Isabelle wasn't a business rival Alara could pretend was a family obstacle. She was the past, a real, breathing, and very determined part of Damien's past that was about to collide with their fictional present. Damien pulled back, his brow furrowed at the sudden tension in her body. "What is it? Who's Isabel?" The question hung in the air, a ticking bomb. She looked from the phone to his confused, expectant face. The man he used to be was a phantom, but his life, his secrets, his other women, they were all still very real, and one of them was on her way. Ilara was no longer just protecting him from the truth of their contract. She was now standing between him and a life he had lived, a woman he had possibly loved, a history she had just single-handedly tried to erase. The beautiful lie she had constructed was about to be put to the ultimate test. Ilara's mind screamed. The name on the screen was a ghost from a life she had actively ignored, a life that existed in whispered rumors at galas and speculative headlines in financial papers. Isabelle Delacroix was not just a business associate, she was the ghost in the machine of their marriage, the unspoken reason Damien had needed a respectable, stable, and emotionally detached wife in the first place. "Isabel?" Damien repeated, his voice pulling her back from the edge of her panic. He looked at the phone, then back at her, his brows knitting together in a frustrated attempt to connect the name to a face. Ilara's survival instincts, honed by a lifetime of navigating her family's precarious social standing, took over. She drew a slow breath, composing her features into a mask of mild annoyance mixed with pity. "Isabelle Delacroix," she said, her tone dismissive. She picked up the phone and switched it to silent, placing it face down on the polished wood. "She's persistent. Her company is a key part of the European expansion for Blackwood Industries. She's never been very good at separating business from personal feelings." Ilara let the implication hang in the air, heavy and poisonous. "Personal feelings?" Damien probed, catching the bait. "She made it clear she was interested in you before we were married," Ilara said, the lie flowing with terrifying ease. She walked to the closet and began pulling out a soft set of pajamas, her back to him. "She didn't take it well when you chose me. She sees the merger as a way to stay in your life, constantly crossing boundaries. I've asked you to be firmer with her, but you always said it was better to manage her ambitions than to make an enemy of her." She had created the perfect narrative. It painted Isabel as a spurned, slightly unstable business rival, and Damien as the noble husband trying to protect his wife while managing a delicate professional situation. It was flawless, and it made her feel sick to her stomach. She turned back to him, holding out the clothes. "Here, you should get comfortable. The doctor said you need to rest." He took the pajamas, his fingers brushing hers. His gaze was fixed on her face, full of a dawning, protective anger. "She's flying in tomorrow. I won't see her." "We'll handle it," Ilara said softly. "Together." Later, after a quiet, tense dinner served in the suite, she found him struggling with the clasp on his medical bracelet. "Here, let me," she said, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. She sat on the edge of the bed beside him, her fingers working the delicate metal clasp. The proximity was dizzying. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, see the fine lines around his eyes she'd never been close enough to notice before. As her fingers brushed against his wrist, a vivid memory flooded her mind. She was in a sterile lawyer's office, the contract spread out on the mahogany table between them. Damien, the real Damien, stood by the window, a formidable silhouette against the city skyline. "This is a transaction, Miss Vance. Nothing more," he had said, his voice as cold and hard as the glass he was looking through. "You will be my wife in public. In private, we are strangers. There will be no emotion, no attachment. Do not forget it." She flinched, the memory a splash of icy water. The man beside her now was not that man. This Damien looked at her with a raw vulnerability, a complete and terrifying trust. This man was her creation. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I'm fine," she lied, finally unclasping the bracelet. Just worried about you. Don't be, he said, his hand covering hers, stilling her movements. I feel safe with you, like nothing can touch me here. He looked around the room, his fortress, and then his eyes settled back on her. You're my home, Ilara. Her heart shattered. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to her, and it was built on a lie that could destroy them both. The next morning, chaos arrived in a cloud of expensive perfume and righteous fury. Ilara had just finished helping Damien with a simple breakfast when the sound of sharp, angry clicks of heels on marble echoed up the staircase. Isabelle Delacroix did not wait to be announced. She stormed into the master suite, her fiery red hair a stark contrast to the room's muted tones. She was beautiful, sharp, and radiating an energy that promised to burn Ilara's carefully constructed world to the ground. "Damien!" she breathed, her eyes for a moment ignoring Ilara completely. "My God, what have they done to you?" She rushed towards the bed, but Ilara moved, intercepting her with a calm, deliberate step. "Isabelle, this is a surprise. I believe we said we'd let you know when Damien was ready for visitors." Isabelle's perfectly painted lips curled into a sneer. "I'm not a visitor, and I certainly don't need permission from his hired help to see him." Damien, who had been watching the exchange with a confused frown, pushed himself up straighter. "Isabelle, Ilara said you might come." His voice was cold, distant. He was already on Ilara's side. Isabelle's eyes widened in disbelief. She finally turned her full attention to Ilara. "What have you been telling him?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "Only the truth," Ilara replied, her chin held high. "That our life is a private one, and that his recovery is my top priority." "Our life?" Isabelle let out a brittle laugh. "You mean your contract? Don't look so shocked, darling. I know all about your pathetic little arrangement. A 2-year deal for the blushing bride to play her part. Did you really think you could keep him locked away up here and play house?" Damien's head snapped towards Ilara, a flicker of doubt in his eyes for the first time. "Contract? What is she talking about?" This was it, the moment of truth. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice was as smooth as ice. "She's talking about the merger agreement, darling, the one our families forced on us." She turned to Isabelle, her eyes full of feigned pity. "I know you had feelings for Damien, Isabelle, and I know it must have been painful when he chose me. But using his accident to spread these malicious lies, it's cruel, even for you." "Lies?" Isabelle shrieked, her composure cracking. She turned to Damien, her hands outstretched. Don't listen to her, it's me. Remember Paris, the bistro on the Seine? You told me you loved me. You gave me the key to your flat." The details, the shared intimacy, were like daggers aimed at Ilara. But to Damien, they were just words, meaningless fragments. A sharp pain shot through his temple, and he winced, pressing his fingers to the bandage. I don't," he stammered, looking at Ilara, his anchor in the storm. "He's tired, Isabelle. You're upsetting him," Ilara said, her voice firm, protective. "You need to leave, now." "I'm not going anywhere. Please." Damien's voice cut through the tension, raw and strained. He was looking at Isabelle, but his hand reached for Ilara's. "Please, leave. You're upsetting my wife." The words struck Isabelle with the force of a physical blow. She stared, speechless, as Damien's fingers laced through Ilara's, a clear, definitive choice. He chose the lie. He chose her. Defeated, Isabelle's face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. She backed away, her eyes locked on Ilara. As she reached the doorway, she paused, her voice a venomous whisper that only Ilara could hear. "You have no idea what you're doing. When he remembers, and he will remember, he won't just leave you. He will ruin you, and I'll be there to watch." The threat hung in the air long after she was gone, a chilling promise of a future reckoning. Alara stood frozen, Damien's hand still holding hers, the victory tasting like ash in her mouth. She had won the battle, but Isabel's words were a prophecy, the biggest secret of all. Not just the contract, but the real reason he had needed a wife in the first place, was still buried, a landmine waiting for his memory to return and trigger the explosion. The silence Isabel left behind was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. It pressed in on them, filled with the echoes of her venomous words. Damien's hand was still wrapped around Alara's, his grip a desperate anchor in a sea of confusion. He stared at the empty doorway, his jaw tight, his face pale. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice a low rasp. He turned to look at her. His gray eyes, now stripped of their usual coldness, were filled with a pained sincerity. "I'm sorry she spoke to you that way. That my past put you through that." "It's not your fault, Damien," Alara whispered, though her heart was still hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Isn't it?" he countered, a bitter edge to his voice. He let go of her hand and walked to the vast window, staring out at the manicured perfection of the gardens. "I don't know what I was, who I was, but if I was the kind of man who inspired that much hatred, who was involved with someone so cruel..." He shook his head, his shoulders slumping in a gesture of profound defeat. "Maybe I don't want to remember." He looked so lost, so utterly alone, that Alara's carefully constructed walls crumbled to dust. The contract, the lies, the danger, it all melted away in the face of his raw pain. She went to him, her hand coming to rest on the rigid line of his back. He didn't flinch. Instead, he seemed to lean into her touch, a silent plea for comfort. "That man," she said softly, her voice gaining strength, "was also the man who gave me a silver orchid to promise me forever. He was the man who said he'd fight his own family for me." She was polishing the lie, making it gleam, making it a shield for him to hold against the darkness of his forgotten past. He turned slowly, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs gently stroking her cheekbones. His gaze was intense, searching. "Is that who I am to you?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. She couldn't speak. She could only nod, the lie a lump in her throat. "Then that's the only man I want to be," he vowed, his voice a possessive, protective whisper. "I'll protect you, Alara, from my brother, from Isabel, from whatever ghosts are in my past. I swear it." He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss for the cameras, not a calculated gesture of public affection. It was hesitant at first, then deep and desperate. A kiss of a man finding his only truth in a world of shadows. It was a kiss of gratitude, of promise, of a love that was terrifyingly, beautifully real to him. Alara's mind screamed in protest, but her body betrayed her. She melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair, kissing him back with all the pent-up loneliness and forbidden longing of the past year. In that moment, the lie was forgotten. There was only this. Only him. The shrill ring of the landline on the bedside table shattered the moment. They broke apart, both breathing heavily, the spell broken. Annoyed, Alara went to answer it, expecting it to be the housekeeper. "Mrs. Blackwood," a crisp, professional voice said on the other end. "This is Helen Ashworth, the headmistress at Northgate Preparatory Academy. I'm so sorry to bother you at home, but I was hoping to speak to Mr. Blackwood regarding Leo." The name hit Alara with the force of a physical blow. Leo, the landmine. The one secret so monumental, so catastrophic, she hadn't even dared to build a lie around it yet. She had prayed for more time, but time had just run out. Her blood ran cold. She turned, the phone still pressed to her ear, and saw Damien watching her, his brow furrowed in question. "Who is Leo?" he mouthed silently. I'm sorry, can I call you back?" Alara stammered into the phone. He's resting right now." "Of course." It's just about the upcoming parents' weekend. Please have him call me at his convenience, the headmistress said, oblivious to the world she had just detonated. Elara hung up the phone, her hand trembling. She could feel Damien's eyes on her, feel his confusion morphing into suspicion. The trust she had so carefully cultivated was now hanging by a single fraying thread. Elara, he said, his voice quiet but firm, leaving no room for evasion. Who is Leo? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. How could she explain this? How could she weave this, the most defining secret of his recent life, into her fragile narrative? There was no lie big enough to cover this. There was only a truth so shocking it would either bind him to her forever or shatter their fragile reality into a million pieces. She took a deep breath, the air burning her lungs. She walked towards him, her steps heavy, as if wading through deep water. She stopped just before him, her eyes meeting his. She saw the question there, the flicker of doubt Isabel had planted, the desperate hope that she, his anchor, would make it all make sense. She had to tell him. A version of the truth, the most dangerous version of all. Damien, she began, her voice shaking, the accident. It didn't just take your memory of us. It took more, so much more. What are you talking about? He asked, his hands balling into fists at his sides. She looked into his eyes, the eyes of the man who thought he knew her, who thought she was his loving wife, and she delivered the final devastating blow, the secret that underpinned their entire contract, the reason for everything. Leo is 5 years old, she whispered, her heart breaking with every word. He lives at a boarding school not far from here. We didn't want him in the middle of our family conflicts, so we kept him away from the press, protected. She saw the utter incomprehension on his face. He was trying to process the words, but they weren't fitting together. He shook his head, a gesture of denial. What are you saying? Who is he? Alara's gaze held his, unwavering. She had to be strong. For him, for the lie, for the child who was the real reason she was here. She reached out and placed her hand over his heart, her touch a plea for him to believe, to understand. This child, she said, her voice cracking, the confession a weight that could crush her. He's your son, Damien. Leo is yours.